Okay, so I've got this base color that may or may not be right. And I'm going to edit it a little because it looks a bit bright to me. We're going to go with that. I like to start with hair colors that are a little bit desaturated. It kind of depends on the base color, and I tend to do hair differently every time. So I'm not sure that I can tell you a method that I use all the time because I'm not sure I have one. Depends on how lazy I feel at the time. But hair is one of those things that even if you feel lazy, it might actually be better when you feel lazy. So, I don't know. It's worth thinking about. So with hair, the same way, when you do shadows, they're colder. When you do highlights, they're warmer. The thing about coloring this way, I guess it depends on each thing. For skin especially, the most saturated color of the skin, if you look at real life, is the midtone. Now it depends on anime if you want to follow that or not, but it's worth remembering that in real life, the most saturated part of the skin is the midtone. In anime, it's a little hard to say. I don't really know very much about anime style, actually. I just know artists that I like. So, depends on... Okay, here's how I think about it. If you're going for this shiny effect... Okay, let me ask you. I don't know how to ask you this. I'm going to go for kind of shiny, but kind of semi-realism. I'm not sure, but it's... The thing about hair, when you shade it, think about hair in groups. Like, for example, this is just an example, okay? Don't do this. When you're doing hair, don't be like, strands everywhere, strands and more strands and more strands like this. This is a bad idea. It kind of works. If you do it well, you can kind of get the feeling. But this is not how hair should really look. Hair is in groups. Okay? So, don't do this. Don't do that. Okay? So, instead, don't worry about it. There's a time and a place for it. So instead, do groupings. Kind of like, think about if you were to shade a group of hair, what it might look like. So you kind of do shadings of groupings like this. This kind of hair is hard because it's just like a bob, and that's a little bit on the difficult side, I think. Girls' hair is easier. But anyway, you do this way a little bit. Yada yada. Okay, you got some groups. It doesn't have to be all that detailed right now. You're just doing groups. Also, this shading should be much, much darker. I'm going to fix that in a second. There we go. Okay. Yeah, strands can come later, but not yet. People tend to think that strands are the best idea right away because they're detailed, and, more detail means more detail, and that's a good thought. But really, here's another trick. Detail belongs where the light hits and nowhere else. Because if you think about what happens when you try to look at something in the dark. It looks like a big black blur. But when it comes into the light, you can start seeing the detail in it. But once the fading goes, look at something with dark atmosphere, where you can kind of see the shape of it and a little bit about it, but it just looks like a big gray mass. Well, it's like that in art too. So when you're doing hair, you don't need strands. Like, I've got these groups and some of it's in shadow, and if I was to take another layer like this and add strands everywhere, and I wanted to put strands in the everywhere like this, the reason this doesn't look realistic is because you've got shadow inside of shadow. Like, you've got detail, you've got just as much detail in the shadow as you have in the light, and that doesn't happen in real life. In real life, you only see the detail where you can actually see the differences in things, which is inside the light and your range of view. So there is such a thing as over detailing, basically is what I'm saying. Oops, and I just over blurred that. Okay. So next, you take a highlight color, which you can probably guess by now is warmer and lighter. And you kind of just, this is where it's just all about style. I'm just going to grab something and go. I'm going to do the whole like anime shine circle thing, like this. But see, it's not just a circle. I'm kind of following the idea that there are strands. Okay, I'll get to this as soon as I finish. I'll explain what I've done as soon as I finish. Okay, so here's your little anime circle shine. Now, I did it like strands. I did it like this. That's hair strands, right? And I told you not to do that. But this is where the light shines, and this is where the detail can be seen. So only here you put the strands. And if you do that, then it's assumed that there are strands everywhere. Does that make sense? If you put strands where you can see the light, which is where the detail can be seen, then your brain assumes that since you can't see what's in the dark, there must be strands there too. You don't have to draw them. So it saves you a bunch of time, saves the viewer some confusion, and ends up looking nice. Because the brain likes things that it can understand. Okay? So that's how I do it. You gotta take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's just the way I like it. So you kind of soften the edges just a little bit. I'm using the eraser, not the blur tool, because I want the strands to stay. I just want the opacity to be different. I'm just kind of softening the edges a bit because it kind of has to fade out of your view. There you go. So now you've got strands in your hair, even though it's only the highlighted part. Your brain kind of substitutes the rest. Although the shadows kind of need a little bit more help, so I'm just going to add some more. This is just about personal taste and what I think looks good. Aww. So I'm just going to kind of, you can ignore me right now if you want. I'm just kind of doing stuff, trying to play around with what makes sense to me and stuff like that. Also, here's a trick about shiny. I don't usually answer that question. Nothing against you, but I don't answer that for most people. So, sorry. How old do I sound? You can feel free to guess. Okay, so here's the trick. Well, I'm sorry, it's mean of me to ask you to guess and then not tell you if you're right or not. But yeah, anyway. So the trick about shiny is this. And I'm going to do this on another layer so you can see it. Grab some colors. I have an example of this in my gallery already. So you can kind of go and look and see if you want. Okay? So here are some colors and stuff. Here's a sphere of what could be hair. Just use your imagination. Imagine that it's a big ball of hair, okay? So I'm going to grab this highlight color like this. Taylor Swift? What if I secretly am Taylor Swift? I don't know. Okay, so here are all these hair strands, right? This is your highlight layer. Well, the trick to shiny hair is putting your shadows right next to your highlights. Literally right next to them. Because in a sphere, normally you would have your shadow about here, right? Your shadow would go here normally in a real life sphere. That doesn't look very shiny. If you were doing metal, your highlights would go here. Right here. We're pretending this is a ball of hair, right? Ew, it's a hairball. Okay. Right? So this is the way that anime hair works. They pretend like it's metal, which is why it's shiny, and they put the shadows side by side with the highlights just like this. Okay? Then they add more highlights back here because they can. It doesn't matter why, they can. So they do. And it looks really shiny. Because if you were doing metal, metal reflects everything, so this is reflected light down here. And they're pretending that this is like metal, so it reflects everything, and there's reflected light everywhere. And so, yeah, it just does. So, if you want to be super shiny, you add another layer of shine above the other one. Yeah, another layer of shine like this. You start getting super, super shiny anime hair, like this. Right? See, doesn't that look shiny? So, depending on how shiny you want it, you can go for that. If you want it to be super, super richly shiny, then you add a layer that's more saturated like this. I just took this layer and put it to overlay. And then you can add another layer of white over it. That's how people make browns look really rich. If you look at really, really rich colored browns in people's paintings, you'll find that there are shades of red in between the shadow and the highlightiest, I can English, yeah, the highlightiest highlights, the brightest thingy, yeah. There's usually a shade of red in between. Okay, also, I have a copy of this in my gallery, so you can go look. I did it with greenish hair because I was doing greenish hair at the time, and people in my live stream were like, how are you doing that? So I showed them.